The passenger work nights driving a shuttle for a small private bus company. It's a thankless job, mostly moving corporate travelers to and from hotels, plus the occasional drunk too cheap for a taxi. The pay is terrible, the hours are worse, but it's quiet. Usually. One night I had a late run, last trip before heading home. The pickup was in an industrial part of town, the kind of place where every building looks the same. Concrete, metal, too many shadows. I pulled up outside the address, an old warehouse with its light still on. No movement. No one is waiting. I checked my manifest. The name was listed as E. Marshall, but there was no company listed, just an address and a note. Client will be waiting outside, except no one was. I put the shuttle in park, tapping the wheel impatiently. Maybe they were finishing up inside. A few minutes wouldn't kill me, but I hated waiting in places like this. Still, too empty. I kept glancing at the side mirrors, feeling like something might be watching from the dark corners of the lot. Then, just as I was about to leave, the door to the warehouse opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, gaunt, wearing an outdated gray suit. No coat, no bag. He walked toward the shuttle with slow, deliberate steps. I lowered the window. "Marshall?" He nodded. His face was expressionless, unreadable. "You were supposed to be outside," I said, more annoyed than I should have been. "Had to make a call," he said, voice smooth, almost too even. Something about him put me on edge, but I unlocked the door. He climbed into the back, settling into a seat directly behind mine. Not in the spacious middle rows, right behind me. We pulled out of the lot, and I glanced at him in the mirror. His posture was rigid, hands folded in his lap. He was staring at the road ahead, barely blinking. "Are you heading home or catching a flight?" I asked, just to break the silence. "Just heading somewhere else," he replied. "All right." Vague. I focused. On the road. The city thinned out as we hit the highway, long stretches of empty asphalt ahead. The ride should have taken 20 minutes. But then I noticed something. Every few minutes he would shift slightly, just enough that I could feel it. A lean forward, a slight tilt of his head. Watching me. Not the road. Me. I turned on the radio to fill the space. The station crackled, caught between frequencies, but I left it. The sound was better than the silence. 5 minutes later, headlights flared in the mirror. A car was behind us, close. Too close. I adjusted the rear view, trying to get a better look. A dark sedan. No license plate. "That car's been following us since we got on the highway," I said, half expecting no response. Marshall smiled, the first expression he'd shown. "Don't worry about them." I felt something cold tighten in my gut. "Friends of yours?" He didn't answer. I gripped the wheel, debating my next move. If this was some kind of setup, robbery, carjacking, I had to act fast. I wasn't about to pull over. I changed lanes, so did they. I sped up, so did they. My pulse was hammered. "I don't know what's going on, but drive," Marshall said, voice calm. "Just drive." The way he said it wasn't a plea, it was a command. Then the car behind us accelerated, pulling alongside. The tinted window rolled down, and I saw them. 2 men, both staring, unreadable. One of them reached down, toward something I couldn't see. That was it. I slammed the gas. The shuttle lurched forward. I weaved through the near-empty lanes, the engine whining from the unexpected strain. In the mirror, the sedan tried to keep up, but I had the advantage of surprise. For the first time, I saw Marshall react. He gripped the seat in front of him, but he wasn't scared. He looked amused. "You're a better driver than I expected," he said. "Who the hell are those guys?" I snapped. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. "Take the next exit, cut through the old truck yard, lose them there." Against my better judgment, I did as he said. I took the sharp exit at the last second, tires skidding. The truck yard was massive, rows of abandoned rigs and loading docks, a maze of metal. I maneuvered between them, headlights off, heart pounding. The sedan didn't follow. For a few agonizing minutes we sat there, the engine humming softly. Then, nothing. No sign of them. I exhaled shakily. "All right, we're done here. Get out." Marshall straightened his suit, still composed. "You did good." "Don't care," I snapped. "Who were they?" He smiled again, that same unsettling, knowing expression. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Cash. Your fare," he said, setting it on the seat. "For the trouble." I hesitated, but before I could say anything, he opened the door and stepped out. I watched as he walked toward the fence at the edge of the lot, vanishing into the dark. No phone, no car waiting. Just gone. The next day I tried looking up the warehouse, his name, anything. Nothing came up. It was like he had never existed. I quit the job a week later, but sometimes late at night when I'm driving alone, I check the mirror, just in case. I didn't realize I had left the back door unlocked, not until I saw the footprints. It had been an ordinary night, nothing unusual at all. I spent most of my evening in my tiny apartment, sitting on the couch with a half-eaten bag of chips, flipping through paperwork that had been piling up for weeks. A crime show was playing in the background, something about a break-in gone wrong, though I wasn't really paying attention. I told myself I'd finish my work, but the more I stared at the papers, the heavier my eyelids felt. Eventually, I gave up. I left everything scattered across the coffee table, plugged in my phone to charge, and dragged myself to bed. Within minutes, I was out cold. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. A faint click. I froze. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to make me question whether I had actually heard it. But something about it felt off, like the kind of sound you only hear when you're supposed to be alone, but aren't. I lay there, staring into the darkness, my ears straining. The apartment was silent. No footsteps, no rustling. Nothing. Maybe it was just the neighbors, I told myself. Maybe the wind. But I had lived here long enough to know what my apartment sounded like. And that noise? It wasn't normal. I turned my head slowly, scanning my room. Everything looked the same. The curtains were still drawn. The door was slightly open like it always was. But the air felt different. It was wrong. I reached for my phone. The screen stays black, dead. That made my stomach twist. I knew I had plugged it in. A chill ran down my spine as I slid out of bed. My feet hit the floor softly, and I took a slow, careful step toward the doorway. The hallway was dark, but I could see most of my apartment from where I stood. The front door was still bolted shut. The couch, the TV, the table, all untouched. Then I saw it. A single wet footprint. It was right by the back door, just barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlights outside. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been outside. I took another step closer. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The footprint wasn't alone. There were more. A trail of damp marks leading from the back door, through the kitchen, down the hall, toward my bedroom. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. I hadn't stepped in anything wet when I got out of bed. That meant whoever had left those footprints had come inside after I had gone to sleep. My fingers clenched into fists. I turned to the back door. It was open. Just a crack, but enough to see the lock had been undone. The cold night air drifted in, making my skin prickle. Someone had been in my apartment. Or worse, they could still be inside. I forced myself to move, even though my legs felt like lead. I crept toward the kitchen, straining to hear anything. Breathing, movement, a shadow shifting in the dark. But there was nothing. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The only movement was the faint swaying of the curtain by the back door. I grabbed my keys off the counter, and in one sharp breath, I ran. I didn't think so. I just moved. I sprinted out the door, down the stairs, into my car. I slammed the lock button the second I got inside and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Could I have left the back door open by mistake? But no, the footprints were real. The door had been locked when I went to bed, and someone had opened it. By the time the police arrived, my apartment was empty. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. It was like no one had ever been there, except for the footprints. They had led straight to my bedroom, and no one could figure out where they stopped. I should have never taken the late shift. By the time I clocked out, the streets were empty, the storefront shut, and the only light came from the flickering neon of a pawn shop sign across the road. My bus was running late, again, so I decided to walk home. It wasn't far, 15 minutes, maybe 20. The city always had an edge at night, a kind of weight pressing down on your ribs. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept my head down, weaving through alleys and side streets to cut down the walk. No point lingering. About halfway home, just past an old abandoned tailor shop, I heard it. A single cough. It wasn't mine. I stopped, listening. The sound had come from behind me, but when I turned, the street was empty. Just a row of crumbling brick buildings, their windows like dead eyes. I swallowed hard, feeling the prickle of unease on the back of my neck. Maybe it was just my nerves. I kept walking. A little faster this time. Then from the corner of my eye, movement. A shadow flitted past a narrow alley to my right. My stomach tightened. Could have been a stray cat, a piece of trash caught in the wind. But I knew better. I picked up my pace. The apartment complex was 3 blocks away now. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, trying not to look back, trying not to think about the sound of footsteps, soft, careful, following mine. The moment I reached my building, I practically threw myself through the front door. The lobby was empty, dimly lit by a single buzzing light bulb. I hurried up the stairs, taking 2 at a time. My unit was on the 4th floor at the end of the hall. As I reached the door, I let out a shaky breath and jammed my key into the lock. Relief flooded me the second I stepped inside. The familiar scent of old books and coffee grounded me, and I closed the door, twisting the deadbolt tight. Safe. I let myself breathe. I even laughed a little. Probably just some guy walking home the same way. Just my paranoia messing with me. Then I saw it. The window in my living room. Wide open. The curtains swayed gently, the night air creeping in like a whisper. My breath caught. I hadn't left it open. I knew I hadn't. A sick, twisting feeling coiled in my gut. Someone had been here, or worse. Someone was still inside. I stood frozen for half a second, my mind blank. Then a soft creak came from the bedroom. A sound so small, so deliberate that it sent ice through my veins. I wasn't alone. I didn't think. I bolted. Out the door, down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet as I reached the street. I didn't stop running until I was 2 blocks away, breath ragged, hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. By the time the cops arrived, the apartment was empty. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no proof of anything. Just an open window and a lingering chill in the air. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. But someone had been there, watching, waiting. And that was worse than anything they could have taken. I was 28 when I found the house. I had always lived in the city, but after my grandmother passed away, I inherited her old home in a small village. It was a tiny, worn-out house right next to a big rice field. The place had been empty for a long time, but when I walked inside, it didn't feel completely abandoned. It felt like someone had been there. That first evening, I put my bag down and stepped outside to look around. A narrow dirt path ran alongside the field and disappeared into the jungle. I was curious, so I followed it, listening to the birds, chirping and the buzzing of insects all around me. Then I saw him, a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing just beyond the trees. He had messy hair and wore old, oversized clothes. He wasn't playing or walking, just standing there completely still, looking straight at me. "Hey there," I called out. "Do you live nearby?" No answer. I took a step toward him. As soon as I did, he stepped back, slipping deeper into the trees. It was strange. He wasn't running away like he was scared, but he wasn't coming closer either. It was like he wanted me to follow him. I hesitated. I knew I probably shouldn't go into the jungle at night, but I also couldn't just leave a little kid alone out there, so I followed. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The trees grew closer together and the air felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. The boy kept moving ahead, never too fast, always just far enough that I could still see him. The path I had been following disappeared, but I kept going. Then all of a sudden, he was gone. I turned in circles trying to find him, but there was no sign of movement. That's when I noticed something else. A small wooden hut stood a few feet away, hidden between the trees. It looked really old, like no one had used it in years. Vines covered the walls, and the door was slightly open. I don't know why, but I felt uneasy. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I stepped forward and pushed the door open with my hand. The wood creaked loudly. Inside, there wasn't much, just an old wooden chair and a pile of dusty fabric in the corner. But then I saw something that made my skin crawl, a metal chain. It was bolted to the floor, rusted but strong, like someone had been locked inside. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the light steps of a child. These were heavy, slow, right outside the door. My heart started pounding. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay quiet. The footsteps stopped. Someone was standing right outside. I could hear them breathing, deep, steady breaths. I held my own breath, waiting, listening, and then nothing. Silence. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I ran. I ran through the trees as fast as I could, branches scratching my arms, roots nearly tripping me. When I finally saw my grandmother's house, I didn't stop until I was inside with the door locked behind me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the local authorities. They came out to check the hut, but it was empty. There was no boy, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But they did find something. Old records, reports of missing children from years ago. Stories about people disappearing near the jungle, never to be seen again. The police didn't tell me much. Maybe they didn't know the full story, or maybe they didn't want to scare me. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Had the boy been trying to lead me into a trap? Or had he been trying to warn me? I still don't know, but I do know one thing. Something was out there in that jungle, and it wasn't gone.